All right. Thanks everybody for coming. My name is Sussman. I'm a Global Change Fellow at the Southeast Climate Adaptation Science Center. We have been hosting a seminar series called the Global Change Series. Seminar series where we talk about global environmental issues. So thanks for coming to our seminar today. We are going to be talking about faith and reasoning and climate change views. We've got two really great speakers here for you who will kind of be discussing different frameworks that people use to understand and grapple with climate change, and then how they apply those frameworks for action and activism. So yeah, thanks for being here, and welcome our first speaker. We've got Dr. Casey Busch from the Education Department. So, take it away.
Yeah, I'm the warm-up act, y'all. All right. So I'm in STEM education and also leadership in public science faculty cluster here. And the majority of my research has been about climate change and youth. And I'm going to be giving you a super high level overview of that. And I think hopefully in a way that will speak really well to what you're going to be presenting. This is not necessarily like a research talk, right? I didn't get into the weeds here. There's an interactive component. I apologize ahead of time. You don't have to participate if you don't want to. But this is the educator in me. So I recommend using the web voting instead of the text voting. Text voting is limited. You can't do all the things. So if you'd like to do web voting, you go to pollev.com / my name, Casey Busch, like the beer, 352. I lived in Texas for a long time and made the distinction there. Is it opening for you okay? Okay, let's hope this works. If not, we'll resort to like actually talking to each other. Is it okay if I go on? This website will also pop up at the next thing. Okay, so this is the first question. What are the first thoughts or images that come to mind for you when you think about climate change? And you can just enter a short text in there as to what you think about.
That's pretty good.
It's working! And then the last holy be God's
Well, that's over.
Cool. This makes my week. It's been kind of a rough week. So, all right. So as this is populating, I'll just tell you, I asked this question of students. A lot of research doesn't ask youth kind of outright what they think about this. They might give them survey questions and then they have to respond to what the survey wants them to respond to. It's very rare to get kind of an open-ended response. And so in one of my research studies, I did ask students that very question. And what came to mind for them is terrifying. They are concerned about it. They're worried. They're scared. The images that they brought forth were very similar to Day After Tomorrow, starving polar bears. There was little to no controversy that they were talking about. There was one student who said something like, "Lies, all lies," right? But I don't know, if it was sarcastic or not. Every other youth that participated in the study had some pretty negative things to say. And so there's a lot of worry and concern out there. Polar bears did make a very big splash in the survey, which was interesting because this was in California. And at the time, there was raging wildfires and a 5-year drought that we were experiencing due to climate change. And it was very rare that the students talked about that. So while they talked about the intensity and the worry that they had about these effects, they still seemed very removed from them. So it was polar bears and it was things that were going to be happening to other people, but not necessarily to them, which is interesting and tells us some ways about how we need to engage with youth about this problem. When I looked at how teachers talk about climate change in the classroom, they tended to shy away from the effects and the societal implications and tended to veer more towards the statistics and the facts, right? So it's just the facts, man, sort of story that students are getting from their classrooms, which there's a variety of reasons why we might think this to be true. One of them is science teachers feel like it's their responsibility to teach the science and not maybe necessarily the social side of it.
But I would argue that that is probably going to not help students feel efficacious and feel like they could or should do something about climate change, which is one of the things that I think school can do for children. Okay, here's another one. How sure are you that climate change is caused by humans? Are you extremely, very, somewhat, or not at all?
Well, that is complicated.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah. Skewed audience. Right, yeah.
That's good.
Very skewed. I asked this question of youth as well. And when we look at the results, this is not by percent, this is raw numbers, just so you can see. But youth, by and large, are pretty sure, they're very sure, but there is some uncertainty in their responses. And when we're thinking about how sure or confident we are that climate change is caused by humans, we can compare that with adults. And this has been, right, pretty steady over the years, which is dipping above and below about 50% over time, that the US adult population thinks that climate change is caused by humans. And again, the reason that we might be concerned about this is that the line of thinking, the logic goes that we would do something about climate change to mitigate it if we thought that humans were cause, right? There's this cause and effect relationship and that action is required. Another question. What do you think influences a youth's decision to take climate change action the most?
Whoops.
On to all of my
Doesn't know.
conclusions here. Yeah. Okay. So you're exactly right. This is kind of a mess of a diagram, but what you can see is that the width of the arrow is indicating the extent to which that thing is affecting climate change action. So this is a structural equation model of some data that I had. And so what you can see then is that knowledge is not directly predictive of climate change action by youth. And so if you're using the idea that, oh, kids don't take action because they don't know, then that's probably not a good lever of change if we want to get more kids to take action. What you see the big driver being is just what you said, social norms. Social norms is predictive of the certainty that climate change is happening. It's directly predictive of whether or not they take action related to climate change mitigation, and their feelings of efficacy, which is like their feelings of whether or not they can do something, and that action would have an effect on mitigating climate change. And so when I asked students this question, I had a follow-up question. I said, oh, by the way, like, who are the people that you're developing these social norms from? Like, who is your reference group? And for youth, parents and peers are very, very, very important. That was the top two. And then, yay, teachers made third place, right? Which is right, just promising for educators, because as educators, we would, hope that we're having some impact on our youth. That's why a lot of people become teachers to begin with. And religious leaders and religious affiliations were also important to youth when they were telling me who helps them form these social ideas about what they should be doing about climate change. The maybe downside of that, and this is from, again, someone else's study, is that adults, US adults, by and large, don't see very strong social norms for mitigating climate change. And so these social norms are, I think, developing. I don't think it's necessarily a stagnant prospect. I definitely think things are changing. Just by and large, about half of Americans, fewer than half of Americans, see that their social group is taking action around climate change. And then in the United States, right, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about climate change denial, which is just outward displays where we're saying that climate change is not happening. And this comes from like the highest level of politics, as well as those that are around our students more closely, which would be their teachers. So remember when I talked about how teachers were the third most influential as far as social norms around climate change. When Plitzer and colleagues looked at how teachers were presenting climate change in classrooms, about half or therearound are presenting climate change using mixed messages, meaning they're presenting both sides of climate change cause. And then my research personally, I looked at climate change in textbooks and saw that even in the state of California, climate change was being portrayed as highly uncertain, both the causes and the effects. And then also, I don't know, it's going on a couple of years now. This is a product of the Heartland Institute, and it is meant to be mirroring the IPCC report. It's the NIPCC report, and it is filled with information about why we should be rethinking whether or not climate change is happening, its cause, what the effects might be, and whether or not we should do anything about it. This document was sent out to about 300,000 K-12 teachers across the United States. And the National Science Teachers Association wrote a very strongly worded memo saying that they absolutely do not stand by the information that is in this, and then they gave a long list of other resources that science teachers could be using. So point being is that although we might think that these mixed messages exist in social media, which youth definitely consume a great deal of and contribute to as well, or even mass media, they might be getting it in their own classrooms via what teachers say and the materials that are presented to them, which can be problematic. One of the considerations then that we have to think about is whether or not these sorts of things have any effect on youth, right? So if youth read in their climate or in their textbook that climate change may or may not be happening, what happens? And I have recent research that is going to be coming out, it's in press right now, that says it absolutely decreases students' perceptions and certainty about climate change. So it does and can have an effect. So it's something that we really need to be thinking about more broadly. Just so you know, one of these textbooks that I looked at was my son's 6th grade science textbook. It was the one they currently had in the classroom. His teacher wasn't using it, however. All right, I have to end on a positive note. It's not all doom and gloom. I think, like I said before, I think social norms and the tide is really shifting. And we have a lot of great news in the past year. So Greta Thunberg being named Time Person of the Year for her organizing activity, I think is inspiring. And she has managed to bring together youth to take action, not only internationally, but in the United States as well. Got a shout out to Iowa down there, which is where I was born and raised. And I think that youth really, truly are kind of our best bet for future change. I'm happy to be able to understand better like what motivates them, even though I'm not working in the classroom anymore. I hope that my work is going to be contributing to the work of teachers more broadly. This was in LA. There was a lot of art down there related to climate change. So this is just one image. So I just wanted to give a brief, broad strokes overview of my research to make sure that we save time for questions. And I think maybe questions would be best at the end. That's what I'm thinking too.
Well, that's very good,
Yeah, that was good. We have our next speaker now, Reverend Susannah Tuttle from the North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light.
Hi, everybody.
I'm getting you set up.
Thank you. We'll have a panel for questions afterwards.
Thank you for doing the technology for me. Appreciate it.
Yes, what an honor it is to be here today. It's been, I believe, 4 years since I was last in this room, and I had the great privilege of being here with Dr. Catherine Hayhoe. Some of you might be familiar with her work. And we still joke about when I was able to convince her to come and tour with us across North Carolina. In 4.5 days, we did 24 events, beginning in Charlotte, all the way across, up through Asheville, all the way across the Triad, and ended in Raleigh. And I still joke that I'm continually recovering from the Hayhoe hangover. She has so much energy and is such an inspiration. And I'm so glad that that has brought, that connection has brought me back into this space, and how it's helped me get involved with this center, with the Southeast Climate Center. And for the last 6 years, I've been directly involved with the CISA, the Carolinas Institute for Science and Assessment, and part of the last 3 Carolinas Climate Resilience Conferences. And the next one, of course, is coming up in October here in Durham, home city for the first time to have that conference. And we have been doing climate communications as part of those conferences. And I've been really impressed about the science community and the academic community's interest in the level of faith-based organizing that we're doing, and really putting it to the front of the conversation. So again, thank you for having me here today. I'll say really briefly that I feel very akin, and I have a slide where I'm going to talk about our Youth Leaders Initiative, but I also am involved in this work through social norms. And I am not a scientist. Carbon parts per million do not spur joy in me. and so my own very brief background is that I also was very interested in education. I went to undergrad in San Francisco to study a self-designed program called Schooling, Self, and Society, how we learn how to be ourselves in school, in society, and how we create communities of selves across the globe. And was a YMCA camp director for thousands of kids, like in the movies. I ran one of those camps in Boulder Creek, Santa Cruz, in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And it was there, and working with the kids and bringing them out to do outdoor education and outdoor adventures, things like archery and boating and hiking and night hikes and arts and crafts, that I realized the incredible disconnect that we have with our human relationship to the natural world. And that's what drew me to want to go to seminary. And I studied at the Graduate Theological Union as part of UC Berkeley, where there's 10 seminaries, and I got to study the world's religious traditions through an ecological ethics lens. At that time in 1998, there was 0 curriculum on what we now use as the language of creation care. That word didn't even really exist back in the 90s, even in a progressive place like Berkeley in the Bay Area. So I've been a part of this movement for a long time now, and I'm just so grateful to root myself here in North Carolina, as I say, the bioregion of my heart. So that's a little bit about my background. So I wanted to start by just showing you some of the things that we start with when we do presentations in congregations and communities of faith. And we remind everyone that going back to the original language of dominion over versus stewardship for, and that all of creation, all of the earth is what God loves. And so pretty obvious to probably everyone in this room, but getting out of that human-centric space is one of the places that we start first and foremost in talking with communities of faith. And our ecological moment, we're all very familiar with what these issues are, you all more so than a lot of people out there. And I think your imagery of what people think about, which is out there versus at home in our local communities, is important to get folks towards. This is sort of, the 101 version. So we start here, move through it. I will say, when I started this job as director of Interfaith Power and Light in North Carolina in 2011, now over 9 years ago, I did a lot of presentations on what climate change is, and I am no longer asked to give those presentations. Everything now for the congregations that we're working with in the North Carolina Council of Churches, of which I'm on staff, is comprised of 18 denominations, making up over 6,200 congregations. I have a lot of outreach opportunities. And the folks that reach out to us to give program or want to get involved in our program area, they want to know what they're supposed to do now. We don't have to go through this. We start there just to remind folks, but we move into action pretty quickly. So an issue of faith. Why faith? Why am I at NC State at the Science Center, talking about this from a place of faith? And what's been really interesting, and one of the reasons, and I say this as a very personal, place of interest, is it came to the point in my own sort of spiritual and soulful crisis of what in the world has happened? What is going on with this species? Why do we feel so disconnected to the natural world? And so when I went to seminary, I really went there more as a student to study what in the world these people that are trained to be religious leaders, how are they learning to do that? And then, of course, finding out that there was no curriculum on how to talk about these issues. And then, if you could go to the same bat place at the same bat time every single week, all these people show up, you don't even have to tell them what you're going to talk about and people still come. What are they talking about? And why are we in this crisis? And I personally and professionally believe it is a failure of people of faith globally that we are in the climate emergency that we are in. This is a moral issue. It's been talked more and more in the secular settings about the moral responsibility that we have. If we don't do a big check-in on who we are and what we love, it's game over. So that's how I have gotten into this work. I'm very lucky that I have a job in this line of work, symbiotically or by the power of grace. While I was in studying and as a student in grad school, studying theology, with no curriculum, paying God knows what amount of money to teach myself, I found other groups of students and professors that wanted to do something, and we formed what is still one of the largest now student groups at the GTU, at the Graduate Theological Union. It's called TREES, and it stands for Theological Roundtable for Ecological Ethics and Spirituality. And so we wanted to dive deep into all of our faith traditions, all of our tenets of our faith, and say, what's going on here? Where did we fall off the story? Let's go back to Scripture. Let's go back to the Torah. Let's go back to the Quran, and it's in there. We know it's in there. And so there's been a tremendous amount of research that's been done since. We now do have a green-lined Bible. So for those of you that are more familiar with a red-lined Bible of all of the things that Jesus potentially said as quotes, we have the same, which is the Green Bible that's been edited and continues to be reviewed of all of the places where the natural world is discussed and how it is our number one job as humans to take care of it. And so while that was happening in 2000, as I was rounding out my time in Berkeley, Interfaith Power and Light was being launched. And so this is our 20th anniversary this year. And very quickly it populated itself. We're different than the Sierra Club in that we are not chapters of a monolithic environmental organization. We are locally organized grassroots initiatives led by the people themselves. So if there's a state like South Dakota, we don't have an IPL in South Dakota, but we're doing outreach, providing mentorship, some other different examples. Puerto Rico now has an IPL after what has been happening there, and there's a tremendous amount of leadership and examples, and folks are now taking mission trips to learn from the seminaries and the faith leaders in Puerto Rico about how to help communities. And so North Carolina, NCIPL, as I mentioned, is housed in the North Carolina Council of Churches, which is really a benefit to me because it's its own institution. While we're celebrating our 20th anniversary of IPL nationally, it's also the 85th anniversary this year of the North Carolina Council of Churches. We were founded in 1935 to address racial inequity in the South. And so an amazing history. We're having events all over the state this year at breweries, which are going to be really fun. What? People, if they drink, what? And so it's going to be really fun, and I'll make sure that you know about that. And we are the only statewide faith-based initiative in North Carolina responding to climate change. So what do I do day to day? I sit at an enormous amount of coalition tables where people say, oh, good, Susannah's here. She's representing the faith community. And I'd say, first of all, there's no such thing as the faith community. Even within a congregation, there will be lots of different, ideas and perspectives. And I certainly don't represent them. But I do often introduce myself as an agent on behalf of people of faith and conscience. So we've actually extended the language that we're using because traditional formal religions, if some of you are familiar with what's happening with religion in this country, churches are closing their doors. There's a lot less attendance. It's an aging out population. How do children that are raised in congregations continue? There's this massive gap, especially the time that youth end up returning is usually when they have youth of their own that they want to go back and reconnect. So we're looking at all the trends and communications there. And then what do they expect when they come back? It's really interesting. I'm going to reference, and I have up here an example of, we're working directly with the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association right now as one of our primary partners in getting solar on congregational facilities. We like to call them billboards for creation care, but we're finding that as congregations install solar, it becomes a way to attract new people because they say that community of faith shares my values. And so that's been really interesting and for more reasons than just saving energy and saving money and reducing carbon, but building community around these initiatives. And so it's just been fascinating. There's been this, I call it the Great Awakening, because especially in a state like North Carolina, where I think the Pew Research Center, that's still right around 58% of people identify as people of faith and say that they attend one or more worship services of some sort once a month, and then it kind of teeters out in different directions. But we also, because we are directly inspired, especially by the youth initiative, to understand that the language of spiritual but not religious is increasing in the United States. And really, when we're talking about moral responsibilities, a moral to the story, it's really about people of conscience. And so there's a movement right now, some of you might have heard, in both the House and the Senate up in Washington. And it's the underlying language. They're developing climate caucuses now that you're invited into, and we're pressing our folks to join. But the message that is circulating around the Hill now is called a call to conscience, to have these real conversations, nonpartisan, across the board. And again, that is the role that the moral language can really help change the conversation in a way that everyone feels like they can approach it. So quickly, I don't know where I'm at in my time, a main course, not a side dish. The other thing, as I say, and I go to all the conferences, and I know everybody in the environmental movement in this state, if you need a job working for one of these, I'll hook you up. Link in with me. but they, initially, they used to be so, oh, we got to look to the non-traditional partners, the secular environmental communities. We're not winning. Why? We still don't have climate policy. What are we doing wrong? We should turn to some non-traditional partners. Oh, the faith community, that's a lot of people. And we already have our Sierra Club meetings in churches anyway. Why don't we get them involved? And it's interesting because then when I'm there, they say, oh yeah, we have Susannah here. She represents the faith community. You're our non-traditional partner. And I step back and I say, we're the traditionalists. What does that mean, non-traditional? Let's sort of unpack that, and think about it from an environmental secular community scenario. And so that's actually shifted as well. And there's been a lot of opportunity when conferences are being planned, like the Carolinas Climate Resilience Conference. This is not an add-on. This is not a sideshow. This is core. This is core work. And so that's been wonderful. And it's been really important that those of us that are doing this work as a faith-based initiative don't automatically just get sucked into the secular world. We have to be able to have the conversations and go deep. I have to be able to talk about heaven and hell to folks that believe from that perspective. When I talk about it's 2020, we need to be harnessing the energies from the heavens above and instead of the hells below. that means something, and we need to be able to talk about it. And when I go and talk with my different senators, talk with Senator Burr all the time, he's a Methodist, talk with Senator Tillis's office all the time, he's a Catholic. Those are different theologies, understanding that, being able to meet them where they're at. I'm not actually the best messenger for these folks because I'm a Unitarian Universalist, born and raised. So my theology is very different. I'm very respectful of all theologies. And we've actually power mapped the entire North Carolina General Assembly. So all of the legislatures, so members of the legislature, we are, if possible, aware of what religion they identify with, where they go to church, it's all Christian predominantly here, and who their pastor is. Because that's going to be an influencer that's different than the, some of the other powers that be. And we do this in an incredibly respectful way. Our notion is to advocate with compassion. And so I have been one of the founders of a brand new network called the Southeast Faith Leaders Network, a collaborative effort building sustainable grassroots power, lifting up the principles and values of a just transition throughout the Southeast. These are our websites and Facebook page. We're brand new. We're not trying to become another nonprofit. The world does not need another nonprofit. We are a network of communicators. We had a webinar today. Folks talking to Miami, and we were Georgia, Alabama, Louisiana, we had Virginia. We had all these faith leaders on the call talking about what our communities need in disaster response scenarios, in particular, what it means to be a first responder. And actually the way that it's playing out fast and furious right now is my colleague called me on the way over here. She is the director of IPL, and she's based in Seattle, Washington, and Seattle is shut down right now. And all of the worship services have been canceled for all over the state. We're in the middle of Lent right now. I mean, the theological implications of not being prepared for what's happening. And I said to her, I'm walking over to a university right now with tons of people. And at any moment, we could get the notice that this is all shut down. And so how are we going to communicate? Whose responsibility is it? Council of Churches is sitting on an enormous database right now. Are we ready to communicate? Do we know the best way to communicate? That's a lot of what we feel like we need to do, and we need to do it across the Southeast. I know I'm totally out of time. I apologize. I'll whisk through all of this. So back to not a side item, but a main course. If you're not already familiar with the U.S. Climate Action Network, this is the largest network in the United States of all of the big greens, so every environmental organization you can think of. And increasingly, with our recent strategic plan, we're going directly to grassroots organizations and making sure that we're doing bottom-up organizing. So something else I can send out a link to if you're not familiar with the Jimenez principles of democratic organizing. Those are the adopted principles that we have taken on as US CAN. This is part of International Climate Action Network, which is ICAN. And these are the groups that we communicate with directly at the top level, all the way down into the local communities as far as what is happening with policy, what's happening with organizing. I will be attending COP26 as part of the faith delegate from US CAN coming up in November. So I'd be happy to communicate with any of you. I hope NC State has a delegation that's going to be going. I know UNC does, so we can talk more about that. But it's been an incredible network, and we're really trying to do the work of living into a just transition and what that means, and that we don't just want to fix this technologically, we want to completely overhaul humanity globally, and eradicate poverty and lift up all living beings of all, of all of creation. So these Jedi principles, adopt these, own them, wear them, get t-shirts, that stand for justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And how we live into these, every call we have a Jedi checklist. We are working on getting to that place. In the faith community, again, we can talk about the beloved community. And we're trying to figure out what that looks like and what that means and what our lives would be. And so living into the Jedi principles is something that US CAN is absolutely committed to. And it really has been a journey. We've written it. We're a completely democratic network. And so I'm happy to give more information about that as well. So our Youth Leaders Initiative, briefly, we call it YLI. I had no intention of starting a Youth Leaders Initiative. I'm very busy. And we had, oh, that picture's not showing up. That's too bad. The gentleman, these are 14-year-olds, 14, 17-year-olds right here. I think there's a 12-year-old in there. That was in a meeting that we just had. We had a 14-year-old member of a Hindu temple in Raleigh attend one of our Solar 101 events at United Church of Chapel Hill and learn about solar. And he came up to me and he said, I want to launch your Youth Leaders Initiative. And I said, really? And it's been an amazing journey. It's completely transformed our organization from inside out, bottom up. You know, while it's been happening, I mean, the inspiration of Greta and so many others, it's just been amazing. And we actually have had to be trained now as adults. So I'm referred to, and you're welcome to own this as well, as an aging ally. I own that. I love it. And I am definitely aging. And there's an organization called YES, Youth Empowered Solutions, that actually works with adults so that we can really mean what it is to support young people as they lead, and just all the stuff we have to unlearn. It's just unbelievable how, and faith communities are the worst at it, because we'll do the exact thing. We'll have a youth-led worship service, for example, and then we'll tell them exactly what they need to do. So that's been a huge shift. And they have their own Twitter page that they won't even give me the password to because they don't want me to mess it up. This is our annual campaign that we do every year. This is national. Of course, it's the 50th anniversary of Earth Day this year. So at least in North Carolina, we've got an 85th anniversary, a 50th anniversary, and a 20th anniversary that we're celebrating. And it's an incredible time. I'm working with Earth Day Network, if you're not familiar with that organization. They also have an entire faith-based arm of their work. And they have handed me, which is beautiful, I'm happy to share, their story of the last 50 years of environmental policy and environmental action in the United States that we're going to be sharing as a timeline as part of our celebrations around the state. And then finally, this is the campaign that we just launched in time right before Super Tuesday. And we have this petition that you pledge to be a faith climate voter, and we communicate them. May 12th is our annual advocacy day at the General Assembly, because it's a short session this year and it's an election season. There's not going to be a lot of new legislation that's going to be moving through, so we're going to use our annual day as a teach-in. You're welcome to come. We rent a space in the museum across the building, and lots and lots of different people come. I actually would love to have somebody, love to have you come and give your presentation. We can talk about that. And here's all of our information. And I was going to show a video, but I'm going to send the link out because we, through the Climate Action Campaign, we're one of 3 organizations. They're at the North Carolina table for the Climate Action Campaign. North Carolina has been identified as one of the most important states through this election cycle right now. And so we're with Environment North Carolina and the North Carolina League of Conservation Voters and North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light. So we're working in consortium, and they just gave us a beautiful gift because we don't have a lot of financial resources. It's hard for us, just like politicians, to get radio time and television time and air time. So we were supported to get a week-long radio ad that some of you might have heard. That was all over the Triangle radio stations, country stations, the Black Gospel stations, 101.5. I mean, all of these places that we often don't have the resources to get on. And we just recently, because that ended on March 3rd, the radio campaign did, we took the radio ad that was professionally recorded with the voiceover and added a slideshow to it. So now it's a video, and we want it to go viral on social media. And so these are some of the other things that we have here. We're using, with the climate strikes that took place, For the Love Of went viral. This came out of North Carolina and NCIPL, and then people would just add whatever they felt like adding on to the end. These are some of the, Act on Climate is the US Climate Action Network's hashtag. So if you want to be following climate on Twitter or any other Instagram, that is the #1 hashtag that's being used. I brought some examples of how important the resolutions that the North Carolina Council of Churches put together, again, representing, you know, I think it's 1.5 million North Carolinians that are members of the congregations that we serve. This is a resolution statement opposing offshore oil drilling. We're working directly with the governor's office. There's a new secretary in the Interior you might have seen who is ready to open our coast to offshore drilling. And then I just have a handout about what it means to advocate with compassion and then guidelines for effective communications on the back here because people really don't meet with their elected officials. They don't often know who their elected officials are, and so that's a lot of what we're trying to do. This is some of our other stuff. And then finally, I'll close. Southern Environmental Law Center supported us in being able to take out a full-page color ad in the N&O a couple of years ago. This was in the center on the fold. Beautiful. It says, "We've seen the light on solar power." It was an open letter to the North Carolina General Assembly. These are all of the bishops and all of the leaders of the different denominations. And then we had a sign on it, and we had thousands and thousands of big leaders as an ongoing campaign. So thanks, that was a lot.
Thank you. That was great.
Thank you.
We are going to have a question and answer panel. I'm going to get Sandy.
Sure.
And yeah, if any of you guys have questions, or if you want to just sit down.
You said teachers came in third after.
Yeah.
Okay. Was that a close second or distant? Or a close third or distant third is what I want to know.
It was, that's a good question. Right, it was just a ranking system. I think it might have been more distant. I think it was more like peers, right, parents than a gap, than teachers. Taking that away from me, come on.
I didn't say they made a smart choice.
It ranks, and I think about all of the teachers that,
Right.
one teacher completely changed my life and the level of influence. Some teachers ruined my life.
We have the power.
Yes.
What suggestions do you have for teaching for like the middle age group, I guess you would say, so between like 30 to 45? What do you think would be a good way to teach those people, and especially people who don't have children? So a lot of times kids bring home what they've learned to their parents, and maybe that educates them, but is there something that you suggest to reach that people that do not have kids and may not be in the religious group or be around the education?
That's a really good question, because I don't, right, I don't do as much with adult education, and I don't, that's tough. Yeah, whatever social groups they're probably involved in would be the easiest way, right? Because what they're looking for, and I think why, right, faith-based communication works well is because you have trusted individuals, right? The trusted messenger. And that is really, really powerful. And I think that's what teachers can be as well, right? The trusted messenger. And so for like the random, like unaffiliated kind of middle-aged person without kids, I don't know, what are we all spending our time on?
Yeah, I mean,
There's a big disconnect between like how adults relate with their peers, because we're not as influenced by all the people we're around. Because we're older, we have our own thoughts, maybe that we've already set in stone. So it might be harder to.
I mean, what research shows is like the biggest driver of climate change belief and understanding and whether or not you're going to take action is political affiliation. And that's especially true for that segment of the population. And so, right, so, but I know, and although it's political affiliation and political identity, I would think that there's other messengers besides. And I know that those are not monolithic, right? That we have like Republican allies who believe in climate change. And I think that those folks can do a lot more to
something.
We've been doing a lot of studying. I mean, certainly folks are referring to this as a civil rights issue of our time. And so in the mobilization of, the activation of people and the recent, I think from Yale and other places, in looking at that the majority of folks in the United States, if we don't say believe in climate change, because we don't, if you want to talk about beliefs, that's a different thing. but are with the understanding that climate change is happening, the facts of it. But the majority, the vast majority, is in the passive stage. They're not actually doing anything. And that's what I think is really interesting. And looking at the timeline and the sense of urgency, I work very closely with USCAN, as I said, and there's going to be a new on-the-ground campaign that's going to be launched called Arm in Arm that hopefully, well, you'll see it because it's going to come out in the news, and there's going to be an enormous amount of direct action taking place. So how people resonate with that and what that means when that starts showing up in the news and bridges start getting shut down, we're seeing it happen in other parts of the world, but when it happens in your own community, how it triggers you or inspires you or puts you into a place of resistance is going to be really interesting, and how we, as we like to say, bring the conversation into the public square. And I think that's what's so interesting about social media these days is we've had some paid ads on social media now, and I didn't realize what a bubble we were in until we actually forced our message onto people's news feeds that hadn't asked for it to be there, and that tremendous amount of negativity that was put back onto us. And we had things like solar panels on, and like animals, I mean, it was like, and it was really fascinating. And so back to kind of the messaging of not starting with the crisis, but going with I like to call it the What I Love campaign. So let's all talk about what we love, and then what are we going to do when all of that is threatened? And what does that mean? And so what do you care most about? I don't have children, and probably if I wasn't, if I didn't know what I knew, I often think, what would really inspire me to think about that? And one person said that she loves her cat so much that if her cat for some reason was ever at risk, that would be what would activate her. And so then there was all this research, and it's been fascinating. Another organization that I think has really shifted the conversation is a group like Audubon, because birding is the largest pastime of anything in the country, second to gardening, I think, or something like that. And they have tons of reports on climate impacts on birds. And you wouldn't think that would be what would get people activated, but even more in much more conservative groups of folk. And so it's like coffee, beer has been such a huge thing, because if you don't have clean water, you don't have good beer. And so the breweries have been leading the conversation with the 30 and 40-year-olds. I love that question, because I think it's meeting people with where their passion point already is, and then showing how it's being threatened.
Yes.
I wonder, sort of along those same lines, I teach a 100-level water and environment class. We just finished talking about climate change and read the U.S. Climate Communication Report, or pieces of it. And what the students respond to, I noticed you said creation care, but you didn't really continue to use that terminology. And some of my students said creation care sounds like love the birds and the bunnies. Not it's a moral imperative, and this is a crisis of conscience, and the whole, I love the jetty, I hadn't seen that before, and bring in the justice equity piece of it. Is creation care, how is that lingo being used, and how does it resonate in faith communities in the world you work in?
Yeah, so what that language does for us is it's the portal into being able to get to the conversation that we want to have. And it's the direct link, like we were talking about, what are you already passionate about? And if you identify as a person of faith and particularly believe, and it's interesting because, the struggle between creation versus evolution is not what we're talking about. It's really more along the lines of caring for this earth, caring, you know, from a theological perspective that this is God's earth, and you know, and they love, you know, all of it, and just meeting them there, and then helping them go to their own source, that it is our job to care for creation. What does that mean? And that's esoteric as well. So it's not like having a blessing of the animal service, you know, or which you should do, but I go back because we, one thing that I think is, again, very fascinated about the faith community that has been overlooked for a long time is we also operate and maintain massive amounts of building space. And like campuses, like universities, I mean, we have just a ridiculous amount of facility space. And so I kind of put it into practical application of, let's start by caring for that which we created, which is the built environment. And most of us, and I have, you know, a number of degrees, it took me until I got to learning about energy efficiency and sustainability and HVAC systems and carbon emissions to realize that I spent my entire educational, you know, uprooting, walking in and out of buildings and not giving them any thought whatsoever other than to the aesthetics of them. And I didn't really know anything. And I think that has shifted a little bit. And so creation care is taking, I think, from a human perspective, a responsibility of taking care of what we've created. So when we get into the fossil fuel industrial complex and how that's completely, that's, you know, a major source of the problem, our transportation, our agriculture, all of these societal systems that we put together, we need to care for that creation. And we need to understand how we are participating in it. And I like to say, I say this all the time to my facility managers at churches, no one is boycotting electricity. That is no one. I don't know anyone. People are trying to get more access to it. And that's something that we need to think about, because we want all that to go away, but we don't want to change. And, you know, and now there's massive amounts of justice issues around the development of renewable technology. And so, you know, that's in somebody else's backyard. And one thing that's been, I'm sure on this campus, you're all talking about it a lot as well, is, you know, we all made coal ash. Now, who's going to pay for the cleanup is a conversation. But every time we flip the switch, right now we're generating coal ash. So, you know, from a policy perspective or political perspective, it's over there, it's their fault. No, we created this. We are actively participating in this society. If we think we're not, then, you know, you're living in an illusion. I mean, we're voting every second of every minute. So we need to organize, mobilize, inspire, educate, and then continuum cycle. And to me, that's for caring for creation is caring for our communities and for the love of ourselves, really.
I have a question for Reverend Tuttle from the online community that's watching over Zoom. And they ask, you emphasize calling your senators. Do you emphasize that over other elected officials? Or are there specific elected officials that you would recommend? Because I know a lot of us have kind of started calling for several different reasons. You kind of just keep hitting the voicemail, which you kind of always wonder if you're just being deleted. So what is recommendations for that?
Yeah, great question. So when it really comes down to politics, all politics is local, right? And so as much as you can, you know, be aware of who is making decisions at your local community level. It's been interesting to do like legislating 101s. I'm not native to North Carolina, so I didn't even understand what you know, a biennial legislative cycle is. What's the difference between a long session and a short session? How am I supposed to navigate that? You know, that's a lot, and yet you have someone in a seat that is representing you. So that's what I like to start with is sort of, you know, we're interested in our family trees. What about our power trees, our decision-making trees? And first and foremost, we need to call upon these people and remind them that they're representing us, and therefore, you know, we have every right in the world to contact them and to be heard. And when we're not, and that's as important to document and be communicating around, and as a 501c3 nonpartisan faith-based initiative, you know, we love everybody, and if someone's a bad actor, then we're gonna love them out of office, literally and figuratively. Like we're gonna, like, you know, and serve as witness to their leadership or lack thereof. What's happening right now in North Carolina, and why the nation's eyes are on us, and why there's like a ridiculous amount of money coming into the state, is because of what a unique scenario that took place in 2016 when we simultaneously elected a Republican president and a Democratic governor. That is very rare. There's been lots of analysis of how that happened, why it happened, that people would vote for both on the same ticket. And so we're looking at what's going to happen now, and again, non-partisanly, like just watching trends. The reverse could happen this year. So let's, you know, contact everyone and make sure that your values are as in front, and that's what our Faith Climate Voter Pledge is, to make sure that what we prioritize as issue areas, that we're hearing that from them, and not just voting party, or, you know, just not even aware of what somebody's position is on something. And I think the reason that you're all in this room, obviously, I would hope, is that climate really, I can't really even use that word anymore. I was going to say trumps all, but like the ability to adjust anything else in society long term requires us to have a habitable planet to live on. And so, and that window is closing so quickly. And so contacting everyone and letting you know how you feel about that is the most important. And then, yeah, if you, I guess I don't want to be recorded, but we can talk offline about key races if people are interested in that and where folks are at. And I do reference, we talk about the power of partnerships, but I know North Carolina League of Conservation Voters is about ready to release their scorecard. And so how everyone, you know, falls on, particularly around environmental issues, is really important. But what again, oh my gosh, I'm talking a lot, I apologize, but I'm gonna end by saying on this one, you know, the advocating with compassion pedagogy is what we are finding, and what the secular climate action movement seems to be most interested in is leading with love. And as I always say, when you're advocating for anything, it's impossible to have a positive influence on someone that you clearly disrespect. And so, and remembering that we are people, and it's all relational. And so, starting, like when we do, you know, meeting norms or whatever, assume best intentions. That's one that always comes up. So, especially with elected officials and decision makers, starting conversations by saying, I want to hear about your hope-filled positive vision for the future of North Carolina. And it's amazing, the conversation, they're like, what? Nobody ever asks me that. If you're not already like clearly aligned with, you know, what it is that you think they're gonna say. So that's how we recommend building those relationships, and then becoming a trusted partner. And what I love to do most, especially here in North Carolina, is say, you know, you're getting a lot of information from a lot of different directions. How do you feel about the information that you're getting? I know that, you know, Sierra Club just dropped a report on your table, and I know Duke Energy was just in here yesterday. How is this resonating? Are you being drawn one way or another, and why? What do you need? What can I bring you that would, you know, from your own constituency? And that's the biggest thing, is they don't really hear from the people in their districts. It's all lobbyists. So we've got to show up and speak our truth.
All right, I'm sorry, that was from Prakash, who's with the North Carolina Citizens Climate Lobby.
Oh, yay. Love CCL.
All right, I think we're about out of time, so everyone, thanks to these guys. We still have some snacks, and probably, I have
usual.
Well.
So there should be people out there. And it looks like they have some resources at